State.
Yes. How did you like that?
It was great. It was, kind of off the beaten path.
Yes.
A little bit mix of obviously in a rural setting, but Lock Haven had a lot of things going on. It was close enough to State College, close enough to
What's their
Williamsport.
mascot? What's the name of the Lock Haven?
The Bald Eagles.
They're the Bald Eagles. Okay.
Yeah. So
sometimes I've been to Lock Haven like once. I think getting lunch or something.
Oh,
like
that,
yeah. Off of 80.
Off
right?
of 80, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's actually a beautiful, beautiful campus.
Mm-hmm.
Just picturesque with the Susquehanna right there, and so forth. And that was a draw for me. So did that. Then I went to grad school at Pitt. I took a year off and then went to grad school at Pitt. Was there for a number of years and then started working for a small consulting firm while I was in grad school, and then they hired me right in grad school. I was had a whole bunch of student debt, so I was like, sure.
What was your major in undergrad and then in graduate school? What would you go for?
Yeah, so undergrad it was kind of pre-law and in poli-sci. I swore I wanted to be a lawyer. Did a few kind of internships and realized I did not want to be a lawyer.
Right.
But I did realize I wanted to work in like public policy and kind of economic development in that space. But I realized I needed a little bit something more than just a bachelor's. So got my grad school, my MPA, so public administration.
Public administration, yeah.
Really a public policy background.
And you enjoyed your time in Oakland? I mean, sounded like Pittsburgh was sticky Velcro for you, huh? Because you stayed in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I stayed. So I enjoyed my time at Pitt for sure, and it just was actually good. Great timing because the city was going through a little bit of a renaissance, had some new leadership within various areas of the city. So shortly after that, started working for the Allegheny Conference. And the Allegheny Conference is what would be our regional chamber of commerce or economic development organization, a little bit of a conglomerate of multiple types of organizations into one. Really allowed me to kind of work on some really big, important projects for a young 26-year-old. I had the mentorship of the CEO of the Allegheny Conference and many of the other leaders at the Allegheny Conference, and they were very much, obviously, players in the community and within the state, and some had, some national power as well. So worked on everything there from things like the Shell petrochemical plant out in Beaver County to federal policy, local policy, land use, taxes, tax abatements, immigration. Really had a kind of, baptism by fire there, but there was a lot of ambiguity, and people that kind of thrived in that ambiguity, did really well.
Yeah, being able to be flexible in the projects that you were working on. Is that how you mean that? Or
yeah, I think it was just more so like when you work at a regional chamber or economic development organization, you got to kind of be nimble enough to learn new things very quickly, be deep enough and get deep enough knowledge on those things to actually help them move without becoming a subject matter expert on everything you work on.
Right. Almost more an expert on process as opposed to, like you say, a subject matter expert. Where to go for that person that knows about the cracker plant or whatever.
Exactly.
The Allegheny Conference, that is quite a high pedigree. I mean, because there's a lot of folks. I would imagine that experience is going to be quite influential on your experience here in Erie, because there's a lot of folks that say that we used to have an Erie conference and we don't anymore. And there's some folks that say that we need to get back to at least some of that kind of vibe where, where we just are talking at a pretty high level with industrialists, with business leaders, and certainly with the nonprofit sector and the public sector as well,
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say I don't know if we need that same exact model, but there are benefits to that model. Pooling resources and sharing mission and pooling talent. We had very many different talent types at the Allegheny Conference, and that really allowed for you to specialize a little bit more in your areas and get kind of deeper and better at them.
Okay. What was your favorite? Like, when you think about the projects you worked on or some of the threads that you followed, like what was really, in your wheelhouse, do you feel?
Yeah, I'd say I kind of carved out, some niches. Obviously, my favorite project I still think was the Shell project, just because, that project was just so large. Shell, spent hundreds of millions of dollars just evaluating the site and the project. It's not very many businesses or firms that can, spend that amount of money on investigation and evaluation. But that project was great because you just really saw from a kind of community level all the way up to a large international firm. You really just saw like how those sort of projects come together. And really, so it was a learning process. It was also, I was handed some things as a 26, 27-year-old, probably way above, my title and salary at the time. But at the same time, it was just great to work with, the governor, the legislature, the locals, the city, the township, school districts, work through all of their issues. Let
me ask you again. I don't want to go on too much of a rabbit trail, but I'm really fascinated by this project. Who was governor at the time? When was this Corbett? Before Wolf, right?
Yes.
Did you find that the way that Pennsylvania is set up with all these municipalities, was that a major hurdle to jump when you're trying to drop a major project like that in a county like Beaver?
I think that's kind of the benefit of the Allegheny Conference, was that rather than Shell coming in and working with 5 townships and school districts and county, they worked with the conference and the governor, and then our job was then to make sure that everybody at the local level had say and input, because they do have a lot of input and say. So
were they busting? I hate to say it this way, but were they busting your chops a lot of times?
Some were.
That seems to be the narrative about Pennsylvania that we're trying to overcome, is that we need to be more pro-business. Not that we get waltzed over by a major multinational, but one sourpuss on a school board shouldn't wreck a multi-billion-dollar investment, right?
You would hope so. I would say, we were coming out of the Great Recession still when this project really started to percolate. So 2011, 2012, we were close enough to the Great Recession. Beaver County, that site actually is actually a site where the previous business was leaving the state. So that site was actually within the community a sore subject, because Horsehead, which was a zinc smelter, they were leaving for North Carolina and greener pastures, they thought.
Right to work, yeah.
And we, so we had this, you're losing a firm and they're taking this many jobs, and here we had this other firm coming in that was going to put about the same amount of jobs with way more capital expenditure and construction and all that sort of stuff, and really be a key asset in their business portfolio. So that was fun. I'd say other issues I loved working on was we did immigration reform. We were one of kind of the leading chambers of commerce in the country on immigration reform, and a lot of people will think, well, what does Pittsburgh care about immigration reform? And I think it's similar to Erie, where a lot of cities in the Great Lakes, immigration has been like the stabilizing effect on our population.
Because Pittsburgh's experienced population loss much like Erie has over the last 40 years, 50, 60
I wouldn't
years.
say much like I think way worse.
Okay.
While Erie has had probably similar trajectories as many Great Lakes cities, right? In kind of that slow matriculation. Pittsburgh had that and 1983 and the steel collapse, which basically supercharged that for 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
The other thing that did is it really undercut their population growth, their natural born, their birth rate, right?
Yes, sure.
So anyway, that was a fun issue to work on. I tell people.
Were you working on some of the higher level work visas? I don't even know but I'm thinking of who are the kinds of folks that Carnegie Mellon and Pitt would want to attract. Yeah. They're going to be the higher knowledge-based worker coming in from India or from Asia or something like that.
Yeah, we were working on, a little bit of both. We had a refugee strategy. We had, we were supporting a pathway to citizenship, but we had we were supporting what was called a high-skilled visa zone, right? Okay. So essentially, you would petition the federal government would have to pass some sort of legislation where certain zip codes and zones would be allowed to go over the visa cap, right? Similar to the H-1B visa, right? How certain sectors in the economy can get a certain amount of visas over the existing visa limits up to a certain point. You would do a similar thing on these zones, right? So essentially, places with certain sort of demographics. You haven't grown your population in a decade or 2 decades or whatever. You can show that you have openings enough that you can actually put these folks into jobs and roles and all of that sort of thing. You
think about it. Okay, so a young man or woman coming in, let's say from Asia, goes to Pitt or Carnegie Mellon, gets their degree. Instead of just taking their skills to South Beach or back to Taiwan, they're keeping their skills in Allegheny County.
Yeah, so that's
where the H-1B would come into play. You have to go beyond the student visa, don't you?
Yeah, that's the thought, because so much of that intellectual property, you really want them to start that idea in business, where you're invested, right. In, like you said, in Allegheny County's perspective there, and then obviously in Erie, we want them here.
Yeah.
So we did that. We worked with Michael Bloomberg's group out of New York, the New American Economy, on some reports and some other things, and obviously we did not win that battle. And that, and then a ton of other issues like transportation. We worked very closely with Chairman Schuster when he was the House T&I chairman on WRDA, which is our Water Resources Act, and then the previous transportation bill, the FAST Act. We worked very closely with them on that, and just had a lot of kind of economic development wins even within that.
We're talking to Brandon Mendoza. He's the president and CEO of the Erie Regional Chamber and Growth Partnership, learning his story here. Stay with us. We're back in 90 seconds here on the Joel Natale Show on Talk Erie. It's Talk Erie and the Joel Natale Show. Brandon Mendoza, the new CEO and president of the Erie Regional Chamber and Growth Partnership, is with us here. We're learning his story, and it's interesting. You know, I talk a lot about the I-79 corridor, and really is Western PA does help each other. I mean, we've got folks that have been involved, let's say, in the cracker plant in Beaver County, and certainly even just on a culture and entertainment, people gravitate to Pittsburgh from Erie, and vice versa, right? I mean, people
in the
vacation up here,
yeah, 100%.
I mean,
and I think, a lot of, my focus will be is how do you accelerate that further, and how do you grow business investment and infrastructure investment out of that as well. One of the kind of challenges in the Southwest is available flat land for development, and particularly in the southern part of our region and county, we've got tons of developable land, that would be that if they were in the Southwest would already have pads on them.
Is that right? Wow.
So figuring out a way to close that gap. One of the things I did kind of in my last two roles at NAIOP and the NBA was the Master Builders Association, was to advocate for something called the Site Development Fund that the state of Pennsylvania and DCED, they really led this creation of this fund to fund these industrial sites.
Is that called Penn Sites now? Is that the same thing?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of a big deal right now.
It is. So, working with our regional partners, definitely want to make sure that we bring home our fair share and build our sites, especially, these mega sites. These investments are happening. They're happening in Ohio, they're happening in New York, they're happening in, Virginia, Maryland, so all around us. And we have to be ready for, and be marketing for those sites as well.
I was going to say, is there a 1,000-acre site anywhere in Western Pennsylvania up and coming? We talk about our own little, Erie County thing, but we're excited about it. 200 acres up at Green Shingle, but I'm just saying, is that the biggest one that's coming up right now, or?
Well, I think that's, I'd say there's maybe one, two. I can think of maybe one in the Southwest.
That's shocking when you go again. You mentioned Ohio. You go down the I-71 corridor between Columbus and Cincinnati, and it's like. It seems like it's one site after another,
Well, what you're seeing is in the Southwest, there's a topography issue, right? You just don't have, to be fair, in Western PA, we should get some accolades in that we've been very successful in brownfield, rehabs and cleanups, and we have built actual, those sites are actually very, productive, if you will, and so that's that's one side. On the flip side, we haven't kept up with the demand for those kind of larger scale sites. The one thing I would have said, this past 4 or 5 years under the Biden administration, with the CHIPS Act and the IRA, I never understood why we didn't have a more kind of strategic discussion as an entire state, like where, hey, we need a CHIPS Act or IRA project here. I'll give you an example. Arizona got basically a $50 billion commitment for a CHIPS Act that's going to be built out over 15 or 20 years. Georgia got a little bit less than that, maybe $20 billion investment. Ohio got, I think, a $10 or $15 million investment.
Is that the Intel plant? Ohio,
yeah, and I'm just thinking, being the Keystone State,
sure,
we that would have been nice to get one of those. But regardless of anything, Erie needs to be ready for those next investments, and we need to be marketing, about those available sites, and the fact that most folks will assume that our topography matches the Southwest when it's obviously very different, very much A lot of flat land out
Yeah,
here.
we've got the Allegheny Plateau. We're actually doing okay, along with our Lake Plain.
Absolutely.
Where, what was it? 40 years ago, U.S. Steel wanted to build a plant on the Ohio-PA line. We've got Brandon Mendoza with us. News is next. It's Talk Erie and the Joel Natale Show. Welcome back on a Monday. It's the Joel Natale Show. We're live from our Kingdom Financial Group studio here at 5th and State. Brandon Mendoza is our guest. He's the president and CEO of the Erie Regional Chamber and Growth Partnership, that strategic organization that makes business happen in Erie. Brandon joined the team in January of 2025, originally from Brooklyn, now makes Erie his home. The kids play hockey?
They do. They do.
This is a good place for that then.
Absolutely. We're investigating our options now, and we got tryout season in March.
Is that right? Okay, awesome. All right, Brandon. So, what was it about the job that prompted you to apply to the open CEO position here in Erie?
Yeah, absolutely. So, last number of years, obviously have a number of mentors in economic development. So, leading a regional economic development organization that, in a community that had strong assets was high on the kind of like, goal list.
Your bucket list. Yeah.
Probably, was thinking, within the next 3 to 5 years on that front. Was at the Elegant Conference, was then at NAIOP, which is our commercial real estate association in Pittsburgh, led that for 5.5 years, and then was at the Master Builders, which is our contractors association. To be frank, I thought the organization had a very strong track record over the 150 years. You don't grow to be 150-year organization without accomplishing a lot of stuff.
Absolutely.
2, I thought the region really was well positioned. I think, obviously, I know about some of the disinvestment, say, of the past 30 years or a little bit more, but watching the actual reinvestment of, say, the past 10 past 10 years in Erie, as well as the aligning of thinking with many of the leaders in the community. I mean, some of that messaging and message points were making its way, down that 79, corridor, as we spoke about earlier. And so I had heard at least, secondhand about that momentum, coming to talk to some of the leaders in the search process and seeing that momentum up front. It was kind of like, okay, I'm kind of excited about this. I think, think about cities in the Commonwealth, cities of around 100,000 with a manufacturing legacy, in key institutions, dime a dozen in the state of Pennsylvania. Think about all of those with this beautiful lake, this bayfront, Presque and committed leaders here in Erie. And to me, that's the standout point. We not only have a lot of what makes any region great, but we have a differentiator in this beautiful lake and this key asset over here. And I think, one of the things that I'd like to do is make sure that we don't bury the lead. From a regional branding standpoint, it's kind of like, we can be talking about a million other things as opposed to, this beautiful, lake right here and everything that sort of attracts.
In all of your experience, do you get a sense that, and something I learned from your predecessor of that firms follow the workforce, that the workforce is the driver.
Yes.
And we've got a couple of challenges with that because we continue to have a population spiral. But in order to attract workforce, it's the intangibles of quality of life and like you say, the hard assets of having a gorgeous place to live. I mean, let's just face it. I mean, I love Pittsburgh. I love the Three Rivers. You know, take a river boat ride down. What is it? The Gateway Clipper. That's gorgeous. But man, this is amazing. And you're 15 minutes away from being on sand with your blanket and your suntan lotion. You know, I mean.
So I agree. I will say this. I will say when it comes to business expansion decisions, it workforce matters, but also where does the CEO want to go for his trips? Where does the executive team want to go for their trips if they're not headquartered here? You know, is there a place for them to go when they come? Is the place attractive? All of that sort of stuff. Is the place receptive to them? All of that. I will say post-pandemic, the workforce angle isn't as strong as it was. The kind of the battle for talent it isn't the only measure.
Okay.
Right. Quality of life overall has really, skyrocketed in affordability. Housing affordability, right? So there's a number of other metrics that have really skyrocketed in terms of business expansion decisions, some of which we will rank rather high, and so forth. But yeah, I mean, the other thing though is that, from a branding standpoint, we can't assume that businesses in Chicago, D.C., New York, Philly, Allentown, even in Pittsburgh, right? Butler County, an hour away, hour and 15 minutes away, right? We can't assume that they know about the story that's going on here.
Interesting.
We also can't assume that they know about this beautiful lake. I mean, they may, they and their family probably have been to Presque Isle, but they've been reintroduced to Erie and Presque Isle, and then also in the lake in general. Is that interwoven in our story, right? And I think my little bit of time here, I think some of it is, but I don't I think of Michigan, and I think the successful Pure Michigan campaign from about 15 years ago. One of the most successful place-based advertising and branding that I think I've ever seen, and really just open your eyes to, I didn't realize that this state was surrounded by several Great Lakes, right, and all of that sort of stuff, right? And similarly,
it didn't hurt to have Jeff Daniels to do your voiceover.
Yeah. Yes. Maybe we'll get you to do our voiceover.
Oh my, yeah, that gets you very far. I'm interested too that you have. Yeah, you definitely have the business attraction piece, but you also have the business, retention and expansion.
100.
And one of the things that we need to rely on our chamber for is just a place to be heard. No. I'm thinking of that typical guy who has a shop. There's 20 employees, and they're grinding out their widgets, man. They're just, and they're doing probably pretty well. Maybe they're doing $5 to $10 million a year, and they're sitting pretty. They have their bass boat or whatever, but it takes a lot of effort to go to that 20 million in revenue, and or they're really getting tired, they're getting old, and there's no real succession plan. I mean, that's the kind of the down and dirty stuff that chambers need to work on, right? To provide resources for.
100%. So being a resource to our members is kind of a critical function and something that we need to do better at, right? It's something that kind of early on is something that, we have been a resource to our members, but elevating that ability to provide information, provide resources, helping those firms figure out, there's actually a lot of resources to when you're already successful. One of the best things, I think this was, my grandma, she said this when I was younger. She's basically like, Brandon, people like to help people that are helping themselves. Meaning,
it's true.
people like to buy in to invest in a success story, right? So actually, a lot of those firms that are kind of like doing well, one of the things that we're trying to do at the chamber, it's not all about luring the big firms into town and all of that. It's about getting some of our medium-sized fish that are ready to grow and graduate them, and help them and partner with them. There's actually a lot of capital available for those firms, whether it be, government or, private capital. It's just a matter of, the vision to get there and the why, right? I mean, that's the thing is that, sometimes it's the worry about that added risk, right? Going from 20 to 100 employees. Now you got several new departments, new HR protocols, new healthcare costs. It can be scary.
Sure.
But you got to kind of like lay out, well, this is how firms have done it. Bring in other leaders that have been in that, family held business. Okay, we were at 25 employees. We were doing, 4 or 5 million a year. We were good and solid. Business was solid. Oh, and then, we started thinking a little differently, and we did a business expansion, added on to our plant, added to business operations. So we went from 25 to 75.
Right.
And what that entails, and the fact that, while it's probably scary at the, at the onset, there's obviously thousands of firms,
right, right.
that do it every day.
Talk about the economic development infrastructure here in Erie. I would imagine you've been spending your time meeting folks here. We've got that quote alphabet soup going on here. Yeah. I mean, public certainly has a place. You've got the authorities have a place. You guys have a place at the chamber. My friend Brian Slavin likes to say, the chamber is the straw that stirs the drink of Erie business, right? That's his famous line.
There you go. I like that one.
Yeah, it's a good one. But sometimes we could either be talking past each other, or we could be, talking with each other and rowing in the same direction. And to me, just as a casual observer, the stakes are really high. I mean, we have not dug ourselves out of 60 years of decline around here. Now, the EDDC, where we're living right now, is a huge positive indicator. The neighborhoods are moving in the right direction. Erie Insurance, Pete Zaffris on 12th Street. I mean, like, there's a lot of cool things going on. There's momentum. But how do we make sure that public, private, nonprofit, everybody's working together? I feel like you guys have kind of the critical role in all that, don't you?
Yeah. So this is kind of like a funny topic because, as I've met with folks, I mean, I think most folks are just assuming that I'm overwhelmed at the amount of entities and the kind of just the complexity, as you said. And I was like, I was in Pittsburgh. Allegheny County has 131 municipalities. With 100 and something police departments, fire departments, maybe economic development and zoning departments and so forth. So,
I would imagine some of the bigger municipalities have their own economic planner. Well, usually in the planning department, right?
I mean, everybody from Cranberry to Mount Lebanon.
Oh my gosh!
You name it. So. At some level, I think kind of more of the kind of CED nonprofit organization standpoint, we have a plethora. From our standpoint, the chamber in every community is a partner to all of those groups. There's a reason why there's a chamber of commerce in every part of the country, in every county in the country. There's an intrinsic value in what we do. Being able to convene the business community, to work on, to one, outline and discover what the problems or issues are in the community and work towards solving them, and to elevate strengths and all of that, right? So my thought process is, there's the alphabet soup, but, we're the C in the soup, we're the chamber, right?
Yeah.
And, my thought process is we're going to be, consummate partner in the region. Trying to figure out how we can work with all of these organizations. Not to do every single issue, but to figure out where do we work with them, right? And what capacity and so forth. My thought process is the chamber is a closer, right? The chamber is supposed to be working on catalytic issues. And there are many issues that are very important to a region that may not be catalytic, that we can support, and we'll write our support letters for their issues and show up and be supportive of those, but we don't need to be the project leads on those.
Yeah.
Versus catalytic, right? An example, in Pittsburgh, the Shell project is catalytic, right? Their new airport catalytic.
Yeah.
The downtown reinvestment plan catalytic, right? From my standpoint, our chamber needs to be focused on those catalytic things.
Some people would say that Fly Erie Fund, when basically the last, I mean, we're sitting in a meeting and we hear from United, oh yeah, we're pulling out after announcing that we're going to increase our load, and we were down to one airline. I mean, chamber stepped up and said, we're going to bring some dollars to the table. We're going to rally the business community. And now we have more flights. We have 3 coming out of American, plus, 2 twice a week out of Breeze. That whole narrative has changed, hasn't it?
100%. And it's an example of a very recent catalytic project that our chamber has done, and something that we will continue to do. Essentially, that catalytic, the Fly Erie Fund, if anybody doesn't know what it is, we essentially set up a fund to help support our airport's ability to be competitive with their employment rates. And within the industry, the airline industry, this is a key measure for how airlines determine where they're going to invest future flights. A number of years ago, we were in the 20s,
cost per passenger to enplane in Erie. Yes.
To enplane, and I believe now, we're approaching single digits, right?
Yeah.
So that work, that's it. That's an example of a chamber right there, right? Like, there's no one business that wants to own that, no one organization. It's a shared issue. It's like, well, how can we want to be a top tier city and then let our airport collapse, right? And there's a lot of work that a lot of people are doing in the community that would be undercut with that.
Sure.
But I will say, one, the executive director at the airport, Derek Martin, he's doing a great job. We've obviously, leading that fund has allowed us to see behind the hood, if you will. And I mean, operational wise, they really are operating at a high capacity. So long term, the chamber really will be trying to work with Derek and his team and what's the future of the airport, right? And obviously the Fly Erie Fund is important, and we will continue to support it and raise those funds. But also long term, how does that airport find a like a revenue source? I tell
Sure.
In Pittsburgh, they've got drilling at the airport. The county supports a good amount of the operations, and then they also have a ton of real estate development that they've done out there at their airport and around the airport. So they've got a number of revenue streams coming in that really have allowed it to not only build a new world-class airport, but also add airline service. So we need something similar.
I'm down to my last couple minutes with Brandon Mendoza, who's from the Erie Regional Chamber. If I'm that small business person or that nonprofit leader, but I'm interested in the chamber. What's the best way to connect with the chamber? Maybe become a member. What's the value proposition for becoming a member? Give me about 60, 90 seconds on that, if you would.
Absolutely. I would say go to eriepa.com and hit our Join Now button really fast. It'll take you literally 3 minutes to complete a join form, an application form. And I mean, I'll tell you right now, we're going to be growing our membership. We are looking at this market, and we have had a lot of long-term success. But one of the things that we want to do is make sure that we're growing, particularly with those small businesses. Those are your small business army out there. And while we love our large firms that provide huge dollars and all of that, those small firms are the heart of chambers, and they also allow us to have that insight into what's going on the ground, what is the entrepreneur dealing with, and keeps us kind of grounded to the real economy.
Yeah. I appreciate. I hope this is the beginning of a great conversation, great friendship here. Brandon Mendoza, President and CEO of the Erie Regional Chamber and Growth Partnership. Thank you so much for taking the time today, buddy.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Very, very cool. 4:56. It's Talk Erie.